So the result of this study is that global land temperature, they have concluded, have already risen by 1.5 degrees plus or minus half degrees over the past 250 years and zero point 0.9 degrees in the last 50 years. So they also conclude definitely that the global warming is a result of the human activities, and the volcanic eruption only can change it for a few years. Furthermore, they looked at the solar variation, solar sunspot, and they do not seem to impact the temperature trend as many deniers of climate change will like us to believe. If there's not enough proof of that, I suppose this is the best proof that the global warming is actually real. There are some mechanisms that increases the rate of global warming. These are what they call them. They call it positive feedback. And these are mean that they are reinforcing mechanism. For example, if we increase the temperature, then the temperature of the ocean will also increase. But as the temperature of the ocean increases, then they cannot dissolve much of its carbon dioxide which could have dissolved. Oceans are a big sink for carbon dioxide. As the temperature rises, they cannot dissolve as much, therefore it gives that back to the atmosphere. You can see that, from, for example, opening a bottle of champagne or some carbonated material. When the carbon dioxide, is released from these beverages, then beverages become flat, and because they do not, the temperature as it rises, the carbon dioxide cannot exist there. So as this carbon dioxide released back into the atmosphere, that caused the increase in the temperature of atmosphere, which further increases the ocean, and this process keeps on continuing and it's feeding on itself. Basically such as a snowball effect, so that's what they call them. There are other mechanisms as well. For example, as the rate of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increases, there will be less nutrient, biomass available, and less nutrient available. That means, there will not be as much trees. Not as much trees means that the trees are the big sink for the carbon dioxide as well. So they cannot suck in the atmosphere, and therefore the level of atmosphere increases, which means less nutrients, so on and so forth. Wetlands are another positive feedback system. At the wetland, the temperature rises. The wetland will release more methane. More methane is causing the rise in the temperature, which further releases the wetlands. And there are other, mechanisms that you can look at well. All of these result in the more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. There are a couple of mechanisms that reduces the rate of global warming. These are called negative feedback or inhibiting or restoring mechanism. For example, as you burn more fossil fuel, there are more soot particles. Soot particles will block, the sunrise, and that means, that the temperature will start to drop. Other thing is that the higher temperature will cause that some of the ocean water to evaporate, therefore expanding the low altitude cloud cover, and that causes the earth to cool down. However, all the scientists agree that these mechanisms which are having the negative feedback are much smaller than the ones that produce more positive impact. So the net impact is always positive. So what are some of the consequences of global warming? The air temperature increases, and therefore the stratosphere will cool as a result. Ocean will get warmer, ice caps melts, climate becomes even more unpredictable, as you can see from the patterns that we have seen in the last few years. Weather-related diseases will increase. As the temperature increases, things like malaria or much of the insect that they prefer the warmer climate, they have a more hospitable environment to flourish, and that can cause into the renewing the old diseases that we had wiped out at some time. As a result, agriculture can suffer. The ship tracks, the one at the left, and the contrail of the planes, they both have positive impacts. as a trap the terrestrial radiation, but they have a negative effect by reflecting solar radiation. The positive effect is much stronger. So this could be a big component to the creation of impacting the global warming. There have been many conferences. This is a list of the conferences that start from 1992 Rio Earth Summit, that countries around the world they gathered and they gave some volunteer uh, commitment. None of them held up, their commitments. In 1997 Kyoto, there were some commitment by the industrial countries, but the United U.S. never ratified that agreement, and eventually there have been all these other commitments. Conferences every year, and still discussing of the methods to limit the carbon dioxide pollution. This diagram gives a good indication of what countries they produce, how much they produce. For example, the biggest circle means the bigger carbon dioxide emission. This diagram shows that the US is number one and China number two. The diagram is about 3 years old. Since then, the trend has been reversed, and now China holds number one and the US becomes the second, very close second, as far as the emission of the carbon dioxide gases. You can see that US and China by themselves pretty much they produce more than 50% of all the carbon dioxide emission by other gases, by other countries. Okay, the pollution can be in the outside or outdoor in indoor. The sources of outdoor pollutions are burning, which are combustion, and also some other chemicals which are released into the atmosphere, have nothing to do with the combustion. The combustion is mainly from combustion of fossil fuels, and we can divide it up into two forms: primary pollutants and secondary pollutants. Primary pollutants are those pollutants that are directly being emitted from the source. For example, from the exhaust of the car, from the smoke stacks of the factories and the power producing companies. These are things like nitric oxide, sulfur oxides, and carbon monoxide, carbon oxide. They call them NOx, SOx, and COx. Could be the natural resources like a dust, pollen, sea salt, and again, these are not combustion, but they are natural source of pollutants. And then the anthropogenic pollutants, which are combustion from the fossil fuels. And classical smog, like the smog in the London, which was mainly because of the burning a lot of coal. The secondary pollutants are the ones that they're not released from the source directly, but the gases which are emitted by those sources in the presence of atmosphere and the condition such as sunlight, water vapor, they react together and produce other pollutants. The prime examples of that are ozone, the acid mist, and then photochemical smog. This diagram shows the US total emission of the carbon dioxide. And those what is called primary criteria air pollutant, those are air pollutant that they have some regulation on them. Those called criteria air pollutant. They include carbon dioxide, the carbon monoxide, nitric oxide, hydrocarbon, and particulate. I've added carbon dioxide in this diagram. It is not considered to be pollutant. It is a natural outcome of a lot of respiration that we even produce carbon dioxide. So we're not including that a pollutant is not a pollutant, but they can contribute into global warming. So you can see that, for example, transportation is a big part of the pollutants. It produces about 87% of the carbon, 77% of carbon monoxide, and about 54% of the nitric oxide, 44% of hydrocarbon, and some percentage, about 3.5% of particulate. Industries are much bigger in production of hydrocarbon, and then stationary sources produce much of a particulate.